She hadn't opened that room in 7 years. Not since the night everything changed. But when a quiet stranger arrived to fix her broken heater in the dead of winter, she didn't know he'd bring more than just warmth. He'd bring something she thought she'd lost forever. If stories of healing second chances and unexpected connections touch your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Every story is crafted to remind you, even in life's quietest moments, something extraordinary can begin. Now, let's begin the story. The Woman Who Forgot to Dream. The wind howled down the street like a wounded animal, rattling loose window panes and stripping the final leaves from naked branches. In a small, dimly lit apartment above a shuttered laundromat, Jake Harlan crouched beside a wheezing space heater. The coil inside glowed dull orange, sputtered, and went dark with a sigh. He muttered a curse under his breath and reached for the pilot switch, already knowing it was no use. Across the room, his daughter Lily slept curled beneath a tattered fleece blanket, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She clutched her stuffed elephant, its seams fraying at the ear. Jake pulled his jacket tighter around himself and exhaled slowly, watching the fog of his breath disappear into the dark. "Come on, old girl," he whispered to the heater. "Just a few more hours." But the silence that answered him was final. He rubbed his tired eyes and checked his phone. The call log was empty, no emergency repair requests. Nothing since the diner job 3 days ago where he'd fixed a walk-in freezer in exchange for pancakes and $20. There was no food left, and he hadn't paid the electric bill. Again. The screen lit up. A message. "If you're still doing late-night work, my heat's out. E. Blake." No number, just the name. It wasn't familiar. No address either, but the area code matched his. Jake hesitated. It was nearly 2 a.m. He looked over at Lily and then at the backpack with her asthma meds zipped tight and half empty. He stood up, grabbed his toolkit, and left a note beside her pillow. "Back soon. Keep warm. I love you. Dad." At the other end of town, a wide, colonial-style house loomed at the edge of a frost-covered cul-de-sac. The porch light flickered like it couldn't decide whether to give up. Inside, Elena Blake stood in the hallway wearing a faded sweater and thick slippers, her silver blonde hair pulled back in a tired bun. Her breath clouded in front of her face. She tapped her phone nervously, then stared down the corridor toward a closed door at the end. She hadn't opened it in 7 years. She had tried to ignore the cold at first. Piled on blankets, made tea she didn't drink, but the temperature kept dropping, and finally something inside her cracked not loudly, but quietly, like old porcelain. She had seen his name once. On a flyer posted to the community board at the library, Harlan Heating, honest work, no questions. The number had faded. She wasn't sure why she saved it. Perhaps it was the phrase "no questions" that stuck with her. So she sent the message thinking he might never answer. Maybe that would be for the best. But now, headlights swept across the frost-bitten windows. Jake stepped out of his truck and crunched across the driveway, the snow shallow but sharp. The house looked like it hadn't aged well, beautiful once maybe, but now frozen in time. He rang the bell and waited, breath puffing from his nose like a horse in winter. The door creaked open. The woman standing there was older than he'd imagined, tall, straight-backed despite her slight tremble. She didn't greet him, just stepped aside and let him in. "I'm Jake," he said gently, "from the message." She nodded once. Upstairs, thermostats in the hall, systems old. He followed her through a living room that felt like a museum, perfect, polished, untouched. Not a speck of dust, but not a sign of life either. No magazines, no mugs, no light in the fireplace. As he ascended the staircase, Jake noticed the air grew colder with each step. At the top, a long hallway stretched into shadow. Several doors lined the right side. At the far end was a white door perfectly closed. "The system's backfed from the bedroom unit," he said. "I may need access." Her reply was instant, sharp. "No one goes in that room." Jake paused. "Ma'am, if the zone's blocked, I said no." She didn't raise her voice, but her eyes, once steel-gray, now dulled, cut sharper than a blade. Something in her tone warned him this wasn't stubbornness. It was pain, ancient and sealed. Jake lowered his gaze. Understood. He went to work. It was an old gas-forced air system. The problem was simple. A frozen air filter had blocked airflow to the secondary line. He replaced it with a spare from his kit and ran diagnostics. The heat clicked on. The vents hissed. He felt warm air against his face. Done. He descended the stairs quietly and found the woman waiting in the front hall holding a checkbook. "Don't need that," Jake said, shaking his head. "Wasn't hard. You just needed a new filter." She paused. "Still." Jake hesitated, then reached into his pocket and handed her a folded scrap of paper. "Leave this somewhere," he said, "just in case." She opened it after he left. Scrawled in pencil, it read, "I understand, but cold shouldn't be the only thing that stays behind. J.H." Elena stood in the hallway long after the truck disappeared. The heat began to spread through the walls, slow, steady, invisible. She walked to the closed door at the end of the hall. She placed her palm on it. The wood was still cold, but her hand stayed there a little longer than usual. And downstairs in a silent room where nothing had moved in years, a single dust-covered thermostat clicked softly. Back to life. Elena Blake hadn't slept. Not really. She had slipped between dreams and half-waking thoughts, her body cocooned in warmth she hadn't felt in years. The silence was no longer sharp and brittle, it hummed with the soft sigh of the heater breathing life into the house. And yet her mind wouldn't rest. Jake Harlan. The name echoed faintly in the early morning quiet. She hadn't expected someone like him, youngish, maybe 40, rough around the edges, but with kind eyes. He hadn't asked questions, hadn't pushed, hadn't looked at her the way others did, like she was fragile or dangerous or both. And the note. She had folded it 3 times and placed it on the nightstand, but somehow it kept drifting into her hands. Cold shouldn't be the only thing that stays behind. She wasn't sure whether to be angry or grateful. That afternoon, Elena walked through her home with a coffee she didn't drink and slippers that barely made a sound on the hardwood. The rooms were pristine. Too pristine. No books out of place. No fingerprints on the window panes. It was a house curated like a museum to grief. She passed the piano. Dusty keys. Untouched sheet music. The same song sat open, marked with sticky notes in a child's handwriting. "Play soft here, Mama." She turned away. Her steps slowed. When she reached the end of the hall upstairs, the door still closed as it had been for 7 years. Her hand hovered near the knob. The wood no longer felt cold, but her fingers trembled. Instead of touching it, she returned to the living room and sat on the edge of the couch like a guest in her own home. And then, for reasons she couldn't explain, she pulled out her phone and scrolled to the message thread with Jake Harlan. "The heat's still working. Thank you." A minute passed. Then 2. Then the 3 bouncing dots appeared. Any time. Glad it held. She should have left it there. But something about that quiet, decent man and the way he didn't try to fix her made her want to ask something. Not technical. "You said you've worked on old houses before. Ever see one get warmer after years of being cold?" This time, he replied quickly, "Yeah, but only if someone stays long enough to let it happen." 2 nights later, a new chill crept into the house. Nothing wrong with the heater this time, but the air filter light blinked yellow. Elena stared at it for 10 minutes before she picked up the phone again. Jake arrived just after 9 p.m. This time she greeted him at the door with a cup of hot tea. "I thought you might appreciate something warm," she said, holding it out without much eye contact. He took it with a nod. "Thanks." She led him to the basement where the main unit hummed. Jake inspected the filter, then smiled faintly. "It's fine," he said. "Might have just been a false alert. Older units do that sometimes." "I see." She stood awkwardly. Sorry to call you for nothing. It's not nothing." He paused, then glanced around the empty shelves and cobwebbed corners. "Feels like this place hasn't had company in a long time." She didn't respond, just walked back upstairs. Jake followed but stopped in the hallway. A piano sat quietly in the corner, its bench slightly askew. He noticed the sheet music, the sticky notes. He walked toward it with a kind of reverence. "You play." "Not anymore," she said from behind him. He didn't ask why. She surprised herself by continuing anyway. "My daughter did. She loved Debussy, said it sounded like dreams." Jake nodded slowly. "My wife loved the same composer. Played every Sunday morning while making pancakes. Now I can't hear it without smelling syrup." Something in his voice made her throat tighten. The way he mentioned his wife, soft, matter-of-fact, but weighted. "What happened to her?" Elena asked quietly. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Gas leak. Old house. Bad winter. The heat never came on that night." Elena flinched. "I'm sorry." Jake offered a sad smile. "Me too. But I got Lily. She keeps me upright. She's your daughter 7. Smart. Brave. She makes me think I'm doing something right." Elena looked away. The guilt in her chest was a familiar ache. She had no such anchor, just a room sealed by pain and years she couldn't get back. "You didn't ask any questions the other night," she said suddenly. Jake shrugged. "I figure people talk when they're ready, or they don't. Either way, I'm not here to dig." That answer, simple, unpolished, broke something loose inside her. "I lost her," she said, her voice barely audible. "My daughter. She was 15. I told her to walk home that day. I thought she needed responsibility. I didn't know the ice would be so thick on the road." Jake looked down. "You couldn't have known." "I should have," she whispered. "A mother should know." Silence stretched between them like snowfall. Then Jake said softly, "Sometimes the thermostat's working, but the sensors are off. They read the wrong things, think it's warm when it's not. We can't blame the system. It's just how it was wired." Elena blinked. She didn't answer, just nodded slowly like the words had landed somewhere deep, even if she wasn't ready to unpack them yet. As Jake packed up to leave, she stopped him at the door. "Would Lily like some cookies next time I still bake? Too much for one person." He smiled. "She'd love that." Then, "Maybe next week. I think the thermostat will need a new check by then." Jake gave a slight chuckle. "I'll be here." When the door closed behind him, Elena didn't walk away immediately. She leaned against it, hand still on the knob, and let her eyes close. For the first time in years, the warmth in her home didn't come from the walls. It came from the quiet kindness of a stranger who knew what it meant to live with ghosts, yet still showed up toolkit in hand, ready to fix what little he could. Jake wiped the grease from his hands and leaned back from the broken microwave he'd managed to revive with a coat hanger and sheer stubbornness. He looked over at Lily, curled up on their worn-out couch, her nose buried in a spiral notebook. She was drawing again, faces, animals, trees with lanterns instead of leaves. Her imagination bloomed despite the cramped walls around her. He didn't disturb her. Instead, he quietly stood, walked into the tiny kitchen and opened the fridge. Empty. Well, not quite. A jar of mustard, half a loaf of white bread, 1 egg. He closed it slowly, eyes scanning the sticky note taped to the freezer door in Lily's loopy handwriting. "Things will get better. We just have to stay warm, Daddy." Jake ran a hand over his stubbled chin and smiled faintly. He didn't know where she got the strength some days. 3 miles away, Elena stood in front of a tray of sugar cookies she'd nearly burned. She stared at them like they were relics from a past life. Her apron was dusted with flour, hands shaking just a little as she moved the cooling rack. It was the first time she'd baked in years. Not for guests, not for herself, just because someone might actually want them. She looked over at the clock. Nearly 4 p.m. Jake said he'd stop by today with Lily to check on the unit she'd texted him, that it made a strange clicking sound, though it hadn't. Not really. A part of her expected to feel ashamed for faking the issue. but all she felt was nervous. Then the doorbell rang. Lily was the first to step inside, eyes wide as they took in the grand sunlit foyer. "Wow," she whispered. Jake followed behind, giving Elena a polite nod. "Thanks for having us." Elena managed a soft smile. "I baked something." She led them to the kitchen. Lily gasped at the cookies. "Are these for us? I hope so," Elena said. "I may have overestimated my appetite." Jake chuckled. "She'll make them disappear." "Watch." Elena poured them both cocoa real from the stove, not a packet. Jake looked around the kitchen. Unlike the rest of the house, this room felt used, lived in. A small plant by the window. A note on the fridge in a young girl's handwriting that said, "I hate burnt toast." He pointed. That hers. Elena followed his gaze and hesitated. "Yes." "She seemed funny," Jake said gently. "She was," Elena whispered. "Always correcting me, always dreaming." She didn't say her daughter's name. She couldn't, not yet. Lily munched quietly on a cookie, then reached into her backpack and pulled out her sketchbook. "Do you want to see something?" Elena blinked. "Of course." Lily flipped to a drawing. It was a girl with long hair standing in front of a glowing window. Outside, snow fell. Inside, fireflies danced. "It's called The Girl Who Caught Fireflies," Lily explained. "She's lonely, but the fireflies tell her stories when the lights go out." Elena's throat tightened. Jake, watching her reaction, said softly, "She's been turning her stories into pictures lately." Lily grinned. "Daddy says they help us remember the good stuff." Elena lowered herself slowly into the chair across from them. "Would you mind if I read some?" Jake raised an eyebrow at his daughter. "Your call." Lily nodded and slid the sketchbook over. As Elena turned the pages, something inside her cracked. The images, the words though, written by a child, felt eerily familiar. Not in content, but in soul. They carried that same raw ache, that blend of wonder and sorrow she once poured into her own writing. There was a drawing of a door closed, locked, and next to it a small firefly hovering with the caption, "It only opens when someone believes you still dream inside." Elena pressed a hand to her chest. "I used to write stories," she said suddenly, her voice nearly breaking. "Before I stopped." Jake met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "You haven't stopped. You've paused." After Jake fixed absolutely nothing but pretended to tinker for Lily's sake, Elena walked them to the door. As Jake helped Lily into her coat, Elena reached into a drawer and pulled out a worn envelope. She handed it to Jake. "My daughter wrote this once," she said. "A story. She never finished it. I've kept it sealed. I don't know why. I want you to have it." Jake took the envelope carefully. "Are you sure?" "No," she admitted, "but maybe it's time someone else reads it. Someone who understands what it's like to lose and still choose warmth." He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he nodded. Lily tugged at Elena's sleeve. "Miss Elena." "Yes, sweetie. I think you're like the lady in my story." Elena knelt down, tears brimming. "What lady? The one who forgot how to catch fireflies," but remembered when someone knocked on her door. That night, Elena sat in the kitchen long after the sun went down, her fingers stained with cocoa and flour, her heart full of things she didn't have names for anymore. In the stillness, she finally opened the envelope. Inside was a story written in a teen girl's uneven cursive. It began, "Sometimes dreams don't die. They just hide in rooms we don't open." Elena wept, but for the first time in 7 years it wasn't from grief. It was from remembering how much she used to believe in magic, and how somehow a child with a sketchbook and a stranger with warm hands had begun to show her the door again. The next morning, Jake sat at the small kitchen table in his apartment, a chipped ceramic mug in hand. He didn't drink coffee, but he held it anyway, half for the warmth, half for the habit. Across from him, Lily was sprawled over a pile of colored pencils and her sketchbook, her brow furrowed as she shaded in the folds of a little girl's coat. He watched her for a long time. "She looks like you," he said softly, nodding toward the girl in the drawing. Lily didn't look up. "No, she doesn't. She's brave." Jake smiled gently. "So are you." "I don't feel brave," she whispered. He reached out and brushed a lock of hair from her face. "That's what makes you brave." She paused, then flipped back several pages. Do you think Miss Elena would like this one?" Jake leaned in. The drawing showed a woman standing in the snow arm stretched out with dozens of glowing fireflies flying around her like stars. The woman's eyes were closed and her mouth curved slightly, not smiling, but no longer afraid. "She would love it," he said. Later that week, Jake and Lily returned to Elena's house not for a repair call this time, but because she'd invited them. The air outside was brisk, but the snow had stopped and the sun gave everything a soft shimmer. Lily clutched her sketchbook tightly as they walked up the front steps. Jake glanced down at her. "You sure you're ready to share that one?" "She needs to see it," Lily said, voice firm, "even if it makes her cry a little." Jake knocked gently. The door opened faster than expected. Elena was there dressed in a deep green sweater and dark jeans, her hair loose around her shoulders. There was something new about her face. Not makeup, not rest, just presence. She looked like someone who had woken up from a long sleep and hadn't yet forgotten the dream. "Come in," she said warmly. They followed her into the living room. The furniture had shifted, pillows fluffed, a new throw blanket on the couch, and music playing softly in the background. A small tray of apple slices and crackers waited on the coffee table. "This looks cozy," Jake said. Elena smiled faintly. "It turns out homes don't just keep you warm. You have to warm them, too." Lily sat down, carefully placed her sketchbook in her lap, and turned to the page she had chosen. She slid it across the table toward Elena. "I drew this," she said, "for you." Elena reached for it slowly, her fingers tracing the edges before she even looked inside. When she saw the image, her breath hitched. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then she looked up at Lily, eyes glassy. "Is that supposed to be me?" she asked softly. Lily nodded. "You forgot how to dream, but you remembered." Elena blinked away the tears that threatened. "You're right. I did forget." She looked at Jake. "Do you know what it feels like when someone you love disappears and you stop allowing yourself to imagine anything better than surviving?" He nodded, and for a beat, silence stretched again, thick but sacred. "I found something," Elena said. She stood, walked to a side table, and retrieved a stack of pages. It was a story she was writing. "My daughter. I never read it until the night you left that drawing." Jake took the papers gently. He scanned the first page, then a few more. It was rough, full of teenage tangents and crossed-out paragraphs, but it sparkled with wonder. The heroine was a girl named Wren who had a magical attic that whispered forgotten songs when she was sad. "She was talented," Jake murmured. "She was relentless." Elena corrected her voice, trembling. She wanted to be published before 16. She wanted to prove that sadness could still make something beautiful. Lily scooted closer. "Can we finish it?" Elena blinked. "What do you mean, you and Daddy and me? We could write the ending together. We could draw the pictures. We could help her story keep living." Elena covered her mouth with one hand. Then, slowly, she nodded. That afternoon, they sat at the dining table together. Jake read aloud snippets of the story while Elena jotted notes in the margins. Lily added tiny illustrations in the corners of the pages, a fox, a firefly, a pair of shoes with stars on the soles. At one point, Elena paused and said quietly, "She had your hands." Jake looked up confused. "Who, my daughter?" "Wren." Elena smiled softly at Lily, but not just in the way her fingers looked, in the way she held on when everything felt like it was slipping, in the way she gave even when she had every reason not to. Jake's throat tightened. He looked at his daughter and saw it too. Resilience wrapped in gentleness, sorrow filtered through light. "I think she'd be proud of you," he told Elena. She met his eyes. "I think maybe I'm starting to be proud of me again, too." As the sun dipped behind the trees, the last light glowing golden through the windows, Elena stood and walked toward the hallway. She paused at the end before the door that had remained closed for years. Without speaking, she reached out and opened it. Jake didn't move. Lily leaned against him, quiet, respectful. Inside the room, dust motes spun in the late sunlight. The bed was still made. Posters lined the wall, books, music. Bright things now faded. A bookshelf held notebooks, framed pictures, and a single empty mug with the word "Dreamer" in sparkly lettering. Elena stepped in and sat on the bed. She didn't cry. She just breathed. And for the first time it didn't feel like drowning. That night, Jake carried Lily half asleep to the truck bundled in her coat. Elena stood on the porch in her slippers, arms crossed against the cold, watching them. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to hate winter." Jake glanced up. "Still do." She looked at the snow-covered lawn, the glowing window behind her, the pages waiting on her table. "No," she said. "Now it feels like a beginning." Jake smiled. "Funny. That's exactly what it looks like from here." And with that, he climbed into the truck and drove off into the gathering dusk, knowing for the first time in years that the cold was beginning to lift. The room had remained open ever since. Elena didn't go in every day, but sometimes when the house was quiet and the air outside hung thick with snow, she would slip through the doorway not to grieve, but to listen. She swore she could still feel the hum of her daughter's spirit lingering between the bookshelves and the soft blue walls. There was no haunting, only warmth, only memory. One morning, as sunlight poured in through the half-frosted windows, she sat cross-legged on the bedroom rug with Jake and Lily, the three of them surrounded by pages, some new, some old, all part of Wren's unfinished story. It was becoming something real now, a true collaboration, like they were rebuilding a bridge plank by emotional plank. Jake had brought an old laptop with missing keys. Elena's fingers danced over the keyboard as if they remembered more than her mind allowed. "I never thought I'd write again," she murmured. "You didn't forget," Jake said. "You just needed the right story to remember why." Lily, curled up beside them, looked up. "This part needs more magic," she declared, tapping a paragraph. "Maybe the girl finds a map under the floorboards, but it only shows places she dreamed about." Jake nodded. "I like that. Dreams as coordinates." Elena tilted her head thoughtfully. "She follows the map, but the last stop is home." Lily's smile widened. "Because sometimes you have to leave to see where you belong." They all went quiet then, not out of sadness but in reverence. The kind of silence that feels like standing in the presence of something sacred. A few days later, Elena sat at her desk with the manuscript open in front of her. She had moved her writing back upstairs to Wren's old desk. It had taken a trembling hand and a whole hour to dust it off the first time, but now it felt right. The room wasn't a shrine anymore. It was part of the story, part of her again. She was working on a transitional scene where Wren's character faced her biggest fear, stepping back into the attic where her dreams had once lived. Elena typed slowly, choosing each word with care when a soft knock came at the front door. She came down to find Lily standing there with a manila envelope clutched to her chest. "Special delivery," she grinned. Elena let her in and closed the door against the cold. Jake followed, brushing snow from his shoulders. She insisted you had to see it today. Lily handed her the envelope. "It's not finished, but it's close. Daddy helped me type the illustrations into the story. It's a prototype." Elena smiled and opened the envelope. Inside were carefully printed pages. Wren's story reimagined with Lily's drawings printed alongside the text. The illustrations were simple but magical. A girl reaching toward the stars, a staircase made of moonlight, a key hanging from a single firefly wing. I don't know what to say, Elena breathed. Lily shrugged. You say the end when it's ready. Not before. Jake looked around. House feels different lately. It is, Elena said. It's not just mine anymore. Later that evening after dinner, the three of them gathered in the living room, sipping tea and cocoa. A fire crackled in the hearth. Jake had fixed the flue that morning. It hadn't been used in years. I thought about donating some of her books, Elena said, nodding toward the shelf. But then I thought maybe they belong somewhere special. Jake leaned forward. You mean like a library, more like a corner, a quiet place where other kids can write, maybe even finish the stories they're afraid to start. Lily's eyes lit up. Like a story nook. Yes, Elena said softly. A story nook. For those who forgot, they were storytellers. Jake tilted his head. That's a beautiful idea. She looked between them. I can't do it alone. You're not alone, Jake replied. Not anymore. 2 days later, Elena found herself at the local community center, a place she hadn't entered in nearly a decade. She stood in the lobby clutching a proposal she and Jake had written together complete with mock-ups of the Story Nook program. A space for children, grieving loss to gather, draw, write, and dream again. A place where voices could return to children who thought they'd lost theirs. The director, a woman in her 60s with cropped silver hair and sharp eyes, took the packet and began flipping through it. After a long pause, she looked up. You wrote, "The Wind Beneath the Snow," didn't you? That children's book with the girl who talked to shadows. Elena blinked. I did. My granddaughter still sleeps with it under her pillow, the woman said, smiling. If this is what you've been working on, I'd be honored to host it here. Elena's throat thickened. Thank you. That night back at home, Jake brought in firewood while Lily helped set up a board for tracking their progress. Elena placed a sticky note at the top. Story Nook Building Dreams Backward. As she pinned the note in place, she caught Jake looking at her not just admiring, but something deeper. The kind of look a man gives when he realizes someone has quietly become part of his story, too. I'm proud of you, he said. She smiled. I'm proud of all of us. Before bed, Lily hugged Elena tightly. Will you read me a chapter tomorrow? Of course, Elena said, brushing the girl's hair back. We're just getting to the best part. When the house quieted down and snow whispered softly against the windows, Elena returned to the room that had once held all her sorrow. She turned on the desk lamp, opened the laptop, and typed a single line. The girl who forgot how to dream was never broken. She just needed someone to remind her that her heart still knew the way. She leaned back and smiled, feeling the warmth not just in the room, but in herself. The room was no longer locked, because she wasn't either. The early morning light spilled across Elena's kitchen table like warm honey casting soft gold onto the papers spread before her. She was up before the sun, a mug of untouched tea cooling beside her elbow, her fingers carefully flipping through the worn pages of her daughter's final manuscript, the one she had discovered in the sealed bedroom weeks ago. It wasn't just a story. It was a map of Wren's heart of who she was before the world tilted. Bits of humor nestled between raw honesty, fantastical creatures dancing across the margins. One line scribbled in the back read, Dreams don't end. They just change direction when we're not looking. Elena exhaled slowly, clutching the page as if it might vanish. The words were handwritten chaotic and full of emotion. It was unfinished but not unworthy. A thought flickered in her mind. Could they complete it? She knew she couldn't do it alone, but maybe that was the point. Maybe it was never meant to be a solo act. Later that day, she found herself standing outside Jake's apartment. The neighborhood was older, the kind where paint chipped faster than repairs came. But there was a quiet dignity in it, a resilience etched into every porch railing and frost-bitten mailbox. Jake opened the door with surprise written across his face. Elena. She held up a small cardboard box. I brought something. He stepped aside, letting her in. "Coffee's fresh." Lily's working on a castle made of index cards and paper towel rolls. "I love that," Elena said, smiling faintly as she stepped inside. Jake motioned toward the kitchen table, clearing space for the box. "What's in there?" She opened it gently, revealing the manuscript pages she had found. Tucked among them were several of Wren's school notebooks, a drawing of her as a child in a homemade cape, and a letter still sealed. Jake leaned in. "Is that?" "I found it in a drawer under her desk." Elena said, her voice quiet but steady. "She never sent it. It was addressed to a publisher. I think she believed it wasn't ready." Jake picked up the envelope reverently. "Do you want to read it?" Elena hesitated, then nodded. He slid a butter knife gently under the seal and opened the flap. Inside was a one-page cover letter scrawled in Wren's loopy handwriting, "Dear Editor. I'm sending this because I believe kids like me need more stories that don't lie. Not every day is magic, but sometimes we can find a piece of it in the middle of the hard stuff. If you don't like it, that's okay. I just hope someone sees the parts I didn't finish and still thinks they matter." Jake folded the letter slowly, his eyes glistening. "She was braver than most adults I know," he said. "She was," Elena whispered. "And now I think it's time someone finishes what she started." That evening, the three of them gathered around Jake's living room table, Jake, Elena, and Lily, who wore a cardboard crown from her castle and insisted she be called Editor-in-Chief for the night. They set out pencils, pens, markers, and sheets of printer paper that smelled faintly like ink and ambition. Together, they began sorting through Wren's writing, cataloging characters, circling plot points, stitching ideas into a structure that honored her voice. "What if Wren's main character doesn't find a happy ending right away?" Lily asked, tapping her pencil. "What if she thinks the fireflies are gone forever, and only later realizes they were waiting for her to come back?" Elena paused mid-sentence. "That's beautiful," Jake added. "Sometimes the light waits until we're brave enough to look for it." Lily nodded solemnly. "That's how it works in real life." They worked into the night, stopping only when Lily fell asleep on the couch, her hand still clutching a crayon. Jake lifted her gently and carried her to bed. When he returned, Elena was still at the table, staring at the stack of pages. Her fingers brushed across the top sheet. "I used to be terrified of holding this," she said. "Like if I touched it, I'd break all over again." Jake sat beside her. "And now I know it's not brokenness," she whispered. "It's love that didn't know where to go." He didn't speak, just reached over and placed his hand gently over hers. It stayed there for a long time. 2 weeks passed in a blur of writing, revising, and laughter. Lily began creating character cards with hand-drawn illustrations and bios. Jake formatted chapters and taught Elena how to use cloud storage. Elena rewrote sections in Wren's style so seamlessly it sometimes frightened her in a beautiful way. One snowy afternoon, as they gathered for another editing session, Elena surprised them both. "I reached out to a small independent publisher," she said. "One that focuses on stories for children dealing with grief and loss. I sent them the draft, just to see." Jake blinked. "You did?" Elena nodded. "I told them it was co-authored by Wren, me, and 2 people who showed me how to find light again." Jake smiled slowly. "What did they say?" "They want to read more." Lily shrieked and threw her arms around Elena. "You're gonna be famous." Elena laughed, truly, laughed, the sound echoing through the house like wind chimes long dormant. "I don't care about famous," she said. "I just want her words to reach someone. Anyone. Even if it's just one kid." Jake looked at her with quiet admiration. "They already have." That night, Elena sat in Wren's room again, laptop on her knees. She stared at the final chapter, just a few lines left to write. The cursor blinked patiently, waiting. She thought of her daughter, of Jake, of Lily and her firefly castles, of how healing had come not as a sudden miracle but as an invitation, a soft knock at the door on a winter night. And then she typed, In the attic of forgotten things, the girl placed her dream like a lantern on a windowsill. She didn't know who would see it, only that someone somewhere needed it as much as she once did. She hit save. And for the first time in 7 years, she didn't cry when she closed the laptop. She smiled. The first copies of the manuscript arrived on a Thursday afternoon, delivered in an unassuming brown box with no label, but Elena's name scrawled across the top in thick black ink. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she stared at it for a long moment, hands resting on either side like she was afraid to break something sacred inside. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, silent and clean, the kind that blanketed the world in stillness. She ran her fingers along the cardboard edge and whispered, "We did it, baby." Then she carefully sliced the tape open with a butter knife and lifted the flaps. Inside were 5 advanced copies shimmering with promise. The cover bore Lily's illustration, a firefly hovering over a girl standing in a winter field, the light from its wings reflecting in her wide, waiting eyes. The title, in soft gold lettering, read, "The Girl Who Caught Fireflies," by Wren, Blake, Elena Blake, Jake Harlan, and Lily Harlan. Elena's breath caught. She ran her hand over the paper, feeling the weight of what they had resurrected, what they had carried across the long distance between loss and healing. She blinked back tears. Then she reached for her phone and texted Jake, "They're here." An hour later, the apartment door swung open and Jake stepped in, cheeks flushed with cold, holding Lily's hand as she skipped into the room. "Did it really come?" Lily asked breathlessly. Elena didn't say a word. She just handed the first copy to her like a librarian presenting treasure. Lily's eyes widened. "It's so pretty." She flipped through the pages, giggling when she saw her drawings. "Daddy, look, it's the attic scene. And the dream map." Jake crouched beside her. "You did good, Bug." Elena watched them from the kitchen, heart stretched full in every direction. But even in the joy, something quietly shifted inside her. A truth she'd been pushing away like a draft under the door. This creation, this healing, this warmth, it was no longer just about Wren. It was about what she had found since, or rather, who she had found, and she didn't want to lose it. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, clutching the book like a teddy bear, Elena and Jake sat by the fire. He was nursing a cup of chamomile tea, one hand resting on his knee, his eyes lost in the flames. "You know," he said quietly, "when my wife died, I thought love was done for me, that it was one of those things you only get once." Elena turned her head, watching him. "I didn't even let myself think about it for years," he continued. "It was easier to just keep moving, keep fixing broken things for other people. I thought if I stayed busy enough, the ache might fade." He chuckled softly. "But you can't outrun absence. It lives under your skin." She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I know." He looked at her then. Really looked. And there it was again, that quiet gravity between them. Not loud, not urgent, but constant. Solid. "You brought something back into our lives, Elena. For me. For Lily. Something I didn't think we'd ever feel again." She opened her mouth, but the emotion in her throat made it impossible to speak. Instead, she reached across the space and placed her hand gently over his. His fingers curled around hers. They stayed like that a long time, hands interlaced, two people who had once been frozen in their separate griefs, now warmed by a shared flame. The following weekend, Elena hosted a small gathering at the local library, a quiet celebration of the book's early release. There were no balloons, no microphones, just chairs, hot cocoa, and a stack of books set up near the children's section, under a hand-lettered sign, "A Story Worth Catching." The director of the library, a silver-haired woman named Margot, introduced Elena to a small group of attendees, parents, teachers, a few curious readers. Then she stepped aside. Elena stood in front of the room holding the book close to her chest. Jake and Lily sat in the front row, their faces beaming. "I used to believe stories could fix anything." Elena began, her voice trembling slightly. Then I lost someone, and I stopped believing in stories altogether." She paused, eyes sweeping the room. "But I've learned something these past few months. Stories don't fix us. They find us. They sit with us in the dark. They wait patiently until we're ready to feel again. And sometimes, if we're lucky, they carry the voice of someone we thought we'd never hear again." She opened the book and read. After the reading, a small boy approached her, probably no older than 8, with a tangle of curly hair and 2 big glasses. "Did the girl in your book really lose her mom?" he asked. Elena knelt to his level. She did. Did it get better? Elena thought carefully before answering. "It got different," she said softly. "But then she found new people to love, and that made things better." He nodded once. "Okay." Then he handed her a folded piece of paper. "I draw stories, too." Elena's eyes shimmered as she accepted it. "I'd love to see more of them." Later, as the library emptied and snow began to fall again outside, Jake walked over and placed his arm gently around her shoulders. "You know what this is, right?" he said. "What a beginning." She leaned into him. "Feels more like a home." He kissed the top of her head, and together they looked out the wide library windows as snowflakes floated down like whispered stories from the sky. Somewhere in the hush between pages and prints, Elena realized the firefly hadn't just returned to the girl in the story. It had come back to her too, and it wasn't leaving this time. The wind had shifted. It came howling through the cracks again, curling beneath doors and rattling windows like it had that first night when Elena's house was more mausoleum than home, and Jake Harlan had stood on her doorstep with calloused hands and a soft voice. Only now the house was warm, lit from within, alive. But something in the air had changed. Elena knew before she saw the message. There had been a weight in Jake's voice when he said he couldn't come by that afternoon. Lily wasn't feeling well. Just a cold, he had said. She probably caught it playing outside without gloves. But hours passed. Then more. By evening, a second text came, short, apologetic. "Going to urgent care. Just to be safe. She's wheezing more than usual." Elena's stomach dropped. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed her coat keys and the small inhaler she still kept tucked in her kitchen drawer, the one Wren used to carry in her backpack. She didn't think. She just moved. When she arrived, the waiting room was half lit, the flicker of an outdated wall TV casting muted color over the rows of tired faces. Jake was sitting in the corner, Lily cradled against his chest. Her cheeks were pale and her breaths came shallow and fast. Elena Jake said, surprised, "You didn't have to." "I did," she said firmly, crouching in front of them. "How long has she had asthma?" Jake hesitated. "Since she was 3. Usually it's manageable." Elena pressed the spare inhaler into his hand. "She needs this." A nurse called his name then, and he stood carrying Lily through the double doors. Elena sat in the plastic chair he left behind, hands trembling in her lap. The last time she'd sat in a room like this was the night Wren had slipped on a patch of ice coming home from school. A fractured skull. An ambulance that didn't make it fast enough through a storm. A doctor who said I'm sorry without ever meeting her child. She remembered the cold, the way it had spread inside her bone deep. She had barely spoken to anyone for months afterward. Closed the bedroom door, burned Wren's winter coat. She couldn't save her own daughter, so she stopped trying to save herself. Until now. Time moved in strange pulses. An hour later, Jake returned carrying Lily again, this time wrapped in a hospital blanket, her head resting on his shoulder. Her breathing was steadier. "She'll be okay," he said, voice thick. "They gave her albuterol and a steroid shot. They want us to monitor her overnight." Relief flooded Elena's chest, swift and painful. Jake looked at her. "Thank you. You saved us time. Maybe more." She shook her head. "No, you've saved me over and over. I just..." "Return the favor." They stood in the cold for a long minute before he whispered, "I didn't know it would hit me like that. The fear. I thought I was past it. You never get past it, Elena replied. You just learn how to walk beside it without letting it own you. He looked at her with a tenderness that undid her. You're stronger than you think. No, she whispered. I just finally let someone help carry the weight. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. The snow kept falling soft but relentless. Her phone stayed on the nightstand screen, dark, but she found herself reaching for it again and again, just to check, just to hope. In the early hours of morning, a text finally arrived. She's sleeping now. Breathing okay. Thank you again for being there. P.S. She asked for you before bed. Said you're part of the dream now. Elena smiled through tears. She got up, wrapped herself in Wren's old quilt, and sat by the window as dawn broke over the snow-covered world. A few days later, when Lily was well enough to visit again, she came into the house carrying something large wrapped in newspaper. It's from both of us, Jake said. Lily unwrapped it proudly, revealing a framed picture, a print of the book's cover illustration, but this one had been altered. The girl was still catching fireflies, but beside her now stood two adults, their shadows cast in the shape of wings. Elena brought a hand to her mouth. I added you, Lily said, because you caught the fireflies with us. Jake touched Elena's shoulder. We wanted you to have it before next week. Elena blinked. Next week, Jake smiled. The publisher confirmed it. Launch day. We're doing it signing, reading, even a little interview. They think it could help parents and kids going through grief. Elena's heart skipped. That fast. They said the story already has its own heartbeat. They just want to give it a megaphone. Elena stared at the framed image. She thought of the waiting room. The way Jake had looked at her through the blur of fear. The way she'd run that night not because of guilt, but because she finally knew what it felt like to be needed again. To choose life instead of just survive it. That evening, the three of them sat on the floor of Elena's living room sorting through note cards ideas for the library's Reading Nook expansion and sketches Lily had drawn for bookmarks and posters. We need a name for the next one, Jake teased. Lily sat up. Ooh, what if we do a whole series? The girl who talked to rain, the girl who chased thunder. Elena chuckled. Ambitious. Lily grinned. Dreams are supposed to be. Jake looked at Elena, then something unspoken passing between them. Not promises, but possibilities. She returned the look, and somewhere in the middle of snowy silence, creaky floorboards, and firelight, Elena Blake, the woman who once locked the door on her own future, felt something melt deep inside her. It wasn't fear, it wasn't sorrow, it was the sound of frost breaking. And beneath it, something even more beautiful hope blooming in the cold. The community center buzzed with quiet anticipation. Rows of folding chairs were arranged beneath strands of twinkle lights and hand-drawn banners that read, Story Nook, where dreams remember you. The scent of fresh cocoa mingled with the crisp smell of new books stacked neatly on tables, their gold-lettered covers catching the warm glow of the setting sun. Elena stood just beyond the double doors, pressing a hand to her chest to steady her breath. This was it. The first public launch. Not just for the girl who caught fireflies, but for her. For Wren. For Jake and Lily. For every version of herself that had ever whispered, You don't belong here anymore. Jake appeared beside her, adjusting his jacket collar. He didn't say anything at first, he just stood close enough that she felt his steadiness before she even looked at him. You're doing great, he finally murmured. I haven't even started, she whispered back. You started the moment you opened that door. She smiled, then turned as Margot, the silver-haired library director, approached with a clipboard. Ready? Margot asked gently. Elena nodded. They stepped through the doors, and a quiet round of applause greeted her. Not loud, but full. Jake squeezed her hand once and took a seat beside Lily, who waved a little too enthusiastically, her cheeks glowing with pride. Elena approached the podium with the worn manuscript tucked under one arm and the polished book in her other hand. Her voice, when it came, was soft. But it carried. I never expected to stand in a room like this again, she began. Years ago, I wrote stories to escape. Then I lost the one person who made those stories feel like home. A pause. I shut the door on writing, on joy, on everything. I believed some losses were too big to speak into words. She looked down, touching the cover of the book gently. But then, someone knocked on my door. A man who wasn't trying to fix me. A little girl who reminded me how to imagine. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, I remembered how to open that door again. She held up the book, her hand steady now. This story began with my daughter Wren, but it lives today because of community, because of kindness, because of what happens when we choose to show up for each other even when we're broken. Applause this time came louder, rising into the rafters. After the reading, people lingered, some for signatures, some for conversation. A few kids clutched their new books like treasure. A boy asked if Wren would ever catch lightning next. A teenage girl said softly, "I lost my dad last year. Thank you for writing something real." Elena's hands shook again, but this time it was from the sheer magnitude of being seen. Jake eventually joined her, holding a paper cup of cider. "You've got a fan club forming." She smiled. "They want more." "Well," he said with a grin, "good thing you've got a co-writer and an editor-in-chief at home." Her gaze drifted across the room to Lily, who was talking animatedly with a group of kids, gesturing with her hands like a tiny professor. "She saved me," Elena said quietly. "You both did." Jake grew serious, his voice lower now. "You saved us, too, you know." Their eyes locked. And in that pause, dense with everything unspoken, something shifted. The kind of shift that didn't need music or sweeping declarations. Just quiet gravity. Recognition. Hope. That night, back at the house, Lily fell asleep on the living room rug with her head on a cushion and a marker still clutched in one hand. She had been drawing bookmarks for her future bookstore empire. Jake tucked a blanket over her. Elena lit the fireplace. The flame caught quickly, casting flickers across the photos on the mantel. One frame now held a new picture, the three of them holding the first printed book together, smiles as real as they were hard-won. "I've been thinking," Jake said, settling into the armchair across from her. "What if we do more than just finish Wren's story? What if we build something lasting?" Elena tilted her head. "Like what?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "A foundation. A non-profit. Workshops for kids writing through grief. A way to give other families the same gift you gave us." Her heart swelled. "That's huge." "Yeah," he said, eyes steady. "But so was what you did. And I think it's time we shared it wider." Elena looked at the sleeping girl on the rug, at the fire, at the framed book. She thought of the night she refused to open a bedroom door and the man who didn't force it open but stood by it patiently until she did. "Yes," she said. "Let's build something. Something that stays open even in the cold." The next morning, Elena stood in front of the bedroom door again. Not Wren's, but the door across the hall. A room that had once been a guest room. Untouched. Now she opened it. She imagined shelves full of art supplies. Beanbags for reading, a bulletin board filled with drawings from kids who thought no one wanted their stories. She whispered aloud, "You left the dream Wren, but now it's finding its way to others." Behind her, Jake appeared, coffee mug in hand. "Thinking about renovations, I'm thinking about beginnings." He took her hand. "Then let's start framing the walls." The door was open. Not just in the house, in her heart. In her future, in the lives she was ready to touch, and this time it would stay open, warm, welcoming, and full of stories that would never again be left unsent. Elena awoke before the sun. She didn't reach for her phone, didn't turn on the light. Instead, she pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and simply listened to the stillness of the house, to the faint hum of the heater, to the distant creak of pipes warming behind the walls. 7 months ago, she would have mistaken that silence for loneliness. Now, it sounded like peace. Down the hall she heard Lily stir in the guest room, the one Elena had once kept closed for fear of memories. That room was now painted a soft lavender with drawings pinned to the walls and a paper chain running along the windowsill. Dream big. Rest easy. Write your magic. Jake had helped paint it. Lily had chosen the color. Elena smiled in the dark. By the time she reached the kitchen, Jake was already there, leaning over the stove in his faded hoodie, flipping pancakes while humming quietly under his breath. The scent of butter and cinnamon wrapped around her like a hug. "I thought this was your signature breakfast," she teased, stepping into the warmth. He looked over his shoulder, eyes crinkling with a grin. "Thought I'd give you a break before the big day." She blinked. "Is it really happening?" Jake turned, holding up a folded newspaper. There, on the front page of the New Haven Gazette, just below a headline about the city's upcoming winter market, was a photo of her. Of them. The caption read, "Grief turned to Grace local family turns loss into light with healing." Children's book. Elena sat down slowly, her hand brushing across the page. She barely recognized herself in the photo, smiling, standing in front of a bookshelf, Lily tucked under one arm, Jake beside her. But the eyes. Those were hers. Only now they weren't shadowed. They were alive. Later that morning, the community center overflowed with guests, parents, children, educators, librarians, even a few reporters. The official book launch event had become something much bigger than anyone expected. Dozens of handmade bookmarks lined the tables, each with a unique quote from Wren's story. On the far wall, a banner read, "Welcome to the Story Nook, where sadness grows hope." Elena stood just outside the main hall, trying to calm her breathing. Jake adjusted her name tag. "You're going to knock them out," he said. "I'm a writer," she whispered. "Not a public speaker." He tilted his head. "Maybe. But you're also someone who turned silence into story. That counts for something." Just then, Lily darted up breathless and glowing. "Miss Elena, they want you to sign books at the front table. And Mr. Jake, they want to know if you're the illustrator." Jake chuckled. "All I did was staple drafts." "Yeah," Lily said proudly, "but you believed in it. That's the biggest part." Elena felt something shift inside her. Not fear, not even nerves, just the soft sense of readiness. She bent and whispered, "Led the way, editor-in-chief." By noon, the room had filled with laughter and tears. A teacher from Boston told Elena her students were creating their own Firefly journals. A woman who had lost her sister placed a copy of the book to her heart and simply said, "Thank you for saying what we don't know how to." Even the mayor stopped by, asking if the Story Nook would consider expanding into nearby schools. Elena shook hands, signed books, and answered questions. But the moment that undid her came when a small girl approached, holding a copy of the book close to her chest. "My brother died last year," she said softly. "He used to read me stories when I couldn't sleep. I don't dream much anymore." Elena knelt to meet her eyes. "Would you like to write your own?" The girl shrugged. "I don't know how." "That's okay," Elena said gently. "You just start with something you feel. That's how this one began." She opened the book to the dedication page. The girl read it aloud haltingly. "For the child who thinks the fireflies are gone? They're not. They're just waiting for your light." The girl smiled for the first time. "Can I come back tomorrow every day?" Elena whispered. "This place is for you." That night, the three of them returned home exhausted but exhilarated. Lily crashed early, curled under a quilt in the living room with a half-eaten brownie in her hand. Jake tucked her in while Elena stood at the window staring at the snow drifting down beneath the streetlight. He joined her silence, folding around them like wool. "You changed lives today," he said. She looked over at him. "We did." He nodded. "I meant what I said earlier. I think it's time to make this permanent. Not just the Story Nook. Us." Her breath caught. "Jake." He stepped closer. "You don't have to say anything tonight. but I want you to know whatever comes next. I'm not walking away. You taught me that healing isn't something you do alone. It's something you grow together." Elena didn't reply with words. She reached for his hand, threading her fingers between his. She leaned her head gently against his shoulder. And for the first time in her life, not as a mother, not as a widow, not even as a writer, but as Elena Blake, whole and still unfolding, she felt what it meant to dream again. Not because she was escaping, but because she had finally come home to herself. The snow had melted by early spring. The air still carried a chill, especially in the mornings, but it was the kind of cold that came with possibility, like something waiting to bloom just beneath the surface. In the backyard of Elena's house, a new sign stood planted in the soil. Hand-painted, slightly crooked, but proudly displayed, "The Story." Nook, a place to begin again. Children sat on picnic blankets with crayons and sketch pads, voices soft with concentration. A retired teacher led a small poetry circle near the garden beds, and under the old oak tree, Jake knelt beside two kids building a story fort out of cardboard duct tape and pure imagination. Inside the house, Elena moved from room to room with purpose, not hurried, just present. Every corner of the home held echoes of both past and future now. The warmth wasn't just in the air, but in the way it held people. In the kitchen, she stirred a pot of lemon tea, the scent bright and soft. Beside her, Lily stood on a stool, carefully arranging cookies onto a tray shaped like books. "Think they'll like them?" she asked. "They'll love them," Elena said, "because you made them." Lily grinned. "I added cinnamon, even though it wasn't in the recipe." Elena smiled. "That's called voice, sweetheart. Writers use it. So do bakers." Jake entered through the sliding door, snow still clinging to the edges of his boots. One of the kids asked if they could make a comic about a time-traveling grandma. Elena raised a brow. "And what did you say I said that's the only kind of grandma I'd read about?" They laughed, light, easy, real. Later that afternoon, the house quieted as the children trickled home, their drawings tucked in folders like sacred treasures. The last to leave was a boy named Colin, whose mother hugged Elena at the door. "He hasn't spoken much since his dad passed," she whispered, "but he wrote 5 pages today, about a boy who plants dreams in the snow." Elena's chest tightened. "Thank you for letting him share that." "No," the woman said, voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for making a place where he could." As dusk approached, Jake started a small fire in the living room hearth. The three of them, curled onto the couch, Elena, Jake, and Lily, wrapped in a blanket that once belonged to Wren. Lily opened their worn copy of The Girl Who Caught Fireflies and nestled between them, finger-tracing the dedication. "For those who stopped dreaming, you didn't lose it. You just needed someone to wait beside you." "Do you think we'll write another one?" Lily asked, eyes hopeful. Jake grinned. "I think we already are." Elena looked down at her hands, once too afraid to hold a pen again and now permanently ink-stained. "We never stopped." They sat for a moment in silence, listening to the fire crackle. Lily fell asleep with the book in her lap. Jake leaned back, his voice low. "Funny thing about that first night." Elena looked at him. "What night?" "When I came to fix your thermostat. I thought I was just there to make something work again." She smiled gently. "You did." He shook his head, eyes warm. "But not what I expected. The truth is, it was never really about the heat." Elena tilted her head. "Then what was it about?" He reached for her hand. "It was about letting someone in." She blinked, heart full. That door, the one at the end of the hall, no longer stood as a barrier, it had become a threshold. Not to what she lost, but to what she had found: purpose, courage, love. A home that was open again, not because it was fixed, but because it had been shared. A few weeks later, on the first truly warm day of the season, the three of them stood on a small stage at a city-wide reading event. Lily wore a sunflower dress. Jake had traded his tool belt for a pressed shirt and the same scuffed boots he'd always worn. And Elena, standing at the microphone, opened the latest edition of their book now in its third printing, part of a grief support curriculum across 2 counties. She read the final lines aloud. The girl didn't need to catch the firefly anymore. She simply opened the window, and it came back on its own. She closed the book, her eyes scanning the audience, not just children, but their parents, their teachers, their caretakers. People who had known silence and carried it like a weight. People who needed a way forward, even if they didn't know it yet. She smiled, because this time she did know how to end the story, and even more how to begin the next one. That night, as the stars blinked awake above the quiet neighborhood, Elena stepped onto her front porch, breathing in the scent of earth warming after a long frost. Jake joined her, handing her a mug of chamomile tea. "No repairs tonight," she teased. He smirked. "Nope. Everything's running perfectly." She glanced over. Even the thermostat, Jake leaned against the railing, gazing out over the yard filled with stories and hope. Especially that he said, "But between you and me," he looked at her, eyes soft. "It was never really about the thermostat. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment and let us know your city or country. It's always heartwarming to see how far these stories travel. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next one. There are many more heartfelt journeys waiting to be shared with you. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and keep believing in the quiet magic of everyday life.